Bruno Sammartino, because he was, you want to talk about, the term legend gets thrown around a lot, right?
Yeah, it does.
He was the epitome of a legend. I mean, I'm sure Nigel has heard of Bruno Sammartino.
Yeah.
I'm sure, right? He was the epitome of a legend. And so I wanted to talk about him. He was 82 years old. He had a hell of a life. His story is the stuff of Hollywood. Like his real life was the stuff of Hollywood. Born in Italy, he was a child during World War II. The Germans took over his town. His family hid up in the mountains. His mother would make the trek down into town to steal food. It would take her, I think he said, like 24 hours to go down there and steal food. I think she got caught once. He lost some of his siblings. He got sick himself, didn't think he was going to make it. His father immigrated to the U.S. years before he did, so he didn't even know his father when he finally immigrated to the U.S. Got into weights, became a power lifter, and of course one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I was looking up his stats this morning. He held the title, the WWF title, for 11 years over 2 reigns. 11 years over 2 reigns.
4,000 days.
And his first reign lasted 7.5 years. 2,803 days. I get it. It was a different time. Everybody's going to say, well, it was a different time. They didn't have TV every week. Fine. It was a different time. But the fact of the matter is, back then, more so than ever, ticket sales drove your business. They didn't have rights fees. They didn't have pay-per-view. They didn't have network subscriptions. If you didn't sell the ticket, you weren't the guy. And he sold out MSG every single week, every single month. He, I think, had the most sales than anybody. And my personal experience with Bruno Sammartino, because I got into wrestling around WrestleMania 1 and 85. By then, he was retired. And I remember WrestleMania 1 when he body slammed Johnny V at ringside. Do you remember that? And his son David was wrestling Brutus Beefcake. But the thing about Bruno that I remember the most, do you remember when Randy Savage dropped the ring bell on Ricky Steamboat's throat?
Yes.
It was a great angle, right? And it led to WrestleMania 3 between the two of them, and arguably the greatest match ever. And Bruno was an interviewer. He was a commentator at that time alongside Vince McMahon on their syndicated television. And they did a segment, where Rick's in the back getting checked out by doctors, and Bruno was doing this really somber interview outside, and Randy Savage comes over to Bruno, and he goes, how's the hot dog doing? Are they putting lots of mustard on the hot dog? And Bruno, in rage, goes, you piece of slime, and he grabs him by the throat and he shoves him into the wall. And that was that's my oldest memory of Bruno Sammartino watching television, because it wasn't until tape that I was able to see the stuff with Larry Zbyszko and Shea Stadium and all that stuff. And even though he was clearly older and clearly retired, the man was still not to be taken lightly.
Course.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that is a real indication that sometimes when you're going to go in life, you're going to go. Because Bruno Sammartino, I don't know of anybody in wrestling that keeps himself in better shape than Bruno Sammartino did to age 82.
It's true.
Sometimes when you're going to go, you just go. And growing up, there was no internet when I was growing up, and WWE didn't mention his name on TV. So I didn't really have any idea who Bruno Sammartino was until maybe the 2000s, because there was no way for me to really find out. Maybe the occasional magazine would mention him. But even by then, it's like, what's the use in mentioning Bruno Sammartino all the time in Pro Wrestling Illustrated and The Wrestler?
It was all Stone Cold and The Rock.
There was no reason to do that. So I would learn about him later, and of course his legacy will be those championship reigns, because so much of his career isn't on tape. Now everything's on film, and there's footage of it. I get on any given week probably 10 messages, emails, Facebooks, whatever, about interactions with wrestlers and former wrestlers. And this has happened for years. I've probably had about 12 to maybe 24 about Bruno Sammartino, and all are glowing, positive interactions with this man. You always hear about how he went to bat for other people who deserved it too, that were below him. You are not, I don't want to say below him. He didn't see anybody as below him. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that he would always do for others. And even though that he was the driving force behind so much of this, he would often step up for other people. And I'm glad that WWE and he were able to come to terms and get him in the Hall of Fame and support him with a statue and put him in a video game even. Like, there that needed to happen, and I'm glad they did make it happen. And
it's a credit to Triple H, and I know I put over Triple H a fair bit on this podcast because he deserves it in certain respects. Triple H mended that fence, and if it was left to Vince Jr., Vince Jr. wouldn't have even tried because he thought, it's a lost cause. And Hunter understood the value of having him in the Hall of Fame because he was the last really big name from that era that wasn't in. And it's great that he was able to get in there. There's two things about Bruno for anybody that's not familiar with his past that puts over what Sean's talking about in terms of him going to bat for people. Larry Zbyszko is a great story. Yeah. Larry Zbyszko was from Pittsburgh, just like Bruno, and he was in, I think his last year of high school, and a massive Bruno Sammartino fan, because Bruno was still on top at that time. And Bruno, imagine this happening today, Sean. Bruno is at home in Pittsburgh. Zbyszko, a high school senior, goes to his house and says, I want to learn to become a pro wrestler. That would never happen today. If somebody just strolls over to Roman Reigns' house or something, or John Cena's house, it's not going to happen. And Bruno said, tell you what, go to college, come back. And he went to college, and he came back, and Bruno trained him. And Bruno got him into the WWF. And not only did he get him into the WWF, he put him in that program with himself.
Made him,
yes. And he didn't have to do that. And then you think about Bruno's son, David. And I've heard that in recent years they were estranged, and I really hope that changed before he passed.
Me too.
Bruno went back into wrestling because of David. And he was retired, and Vince was pushing him because Bruno wanted a spot for David on the card in the WWF, and Vince was pushing to get him back in the ring, and Bruno didn't want to do it, and he did it for his kid. And, he was you don't hear anything but good things about Bruno. One thing about him, too, is, have you ever read his autobiography?
I haven't.
Came out in 1990, and I've read it. Bruno was so old school, and he was so protective of the business that if you read his autobiography, he actually claimed in the autobiography that he was never told he was never told the outcome of a match before a match. He claimed.
Yeah, he hung on to that.
He claimed he was never told the outcome of a match beforehand, which you know is not true. He also claimed he never bladed, which is also not true. But he was just protective of the business that way, and in 1990, more so than now, you wouldn't talk about that kind of stuff, right?
Of course.
So he was absolutely a legend. I mean, his numbers speak for themselves. I know he joked at the Hall of Fame. Guess what? I just sold out MSG again because he went into New York. But 82, and he had a hell of a life. Not much to complain about, man.
No, and almost all of his work was before my time, although, as you mentioned, he did come back in, I think 86, 87, or 85 through 87 and worked some matches. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure his last match in WWF was him tagging with Hulk Hogan against One Man Gang and King Kong Bundy on a house show.
One Man Bang would be a hell of a name for a wrestler.
Well, if they would, how they missed that on a Val Venus promo.
The One Man Bang. One other thing about Bruno Sammartino, and Nigel put up this image. Some people may know this, some may not. Bruno Sammartino is the namesake for Bruno Mars, who is the famous musician now. And Bruno Mars has told the story about how his dad was a wrestling fan, and when Bruno Mars was a baby, his dad thought he looked like Bruno Sammartino and called him Bruno.
Boy, that didn't work out.
Well, the name stuck though.
I mean, the looking like Bruno Sammartino thing.
No.
He's 5'1".
Yeah, he looks kind of like a troll doll, sort of. But the name stuck. And they met, the image that Nigel put up, Bruno Sammartino got to meet Bruno Mars in Pittsburgh when Bruno Mars was there on tour. And so that was great. I think that was only within the last few years that they met. But, condolences to Bruno's family, but again, not much to complain about. Hell of a life, hell of a career, and quite the legacy, too.